On Christmas night, 1831, the fields of Jamaica glowed with fire. Tens of thousands of enslaved men and women refused to bow to their masters any longer. With one voice, they demanded freedom, and for a moment, it looked as if the empire itself might fall. Jamaica was Britain's crown jewel in the Caribbean. Its sugar plantations filled London's teacups and sweetened its pastries. Its wealth was unmatched, but every pound of sugar carried with it the sweat and blood of enslaved Africans. For the nearly 300,000 enslaved people on the island, life was misery without end. They rose before dawn and bent their backs in the cane fields until dusk. Under the scorching sun, they swung machetes, cut stalk after stalk, loaded carts until their muscles screamed. Overseers stood watch with whips, their lashes tearing flesh as casually as one might swat a fly. Nights brought no rest, just the dread of doing it all again. Families were torn apart, children sold, wives abused, husbands beaten. In Jamaica, human beings were treated as tools, worked until they broke and then replaced. But among the enslaved there was a man who carried a different vision. His name was Samuel Sharpe. Sharpe was literate, a rare gift among the enslaved, and he was deeply religious. He was a Baptist preacher, trusted by both masters and slaves alike. To the planters he seemed harmless, just another slave who quoted scripture. But to his people, Sharpe's sermons carried dangerous power. He preached that slavery was a sin against God, that Christ's law proclaimed all men and women equal. He told them that freedom was not a gift from masters, but a birthright from heaven. And slowly, in secret gatherings and whispered prayers, Sharpe's words planted rebellion. Life on the plantations remained unbearable. Day after day, men and women collapsed from exhaustion, their backs striped with scars. Overseers mocked their suffering, laughing as blood mixed with sweat. The food was meager, salted fish, scraps of yam, just enough to survive. And always the lash waited for the slightest disobedience. Yet at night, away from the cane fields, the enslaved gathered to sing hymns and pray. They lifted their voices in songs of deliverance, but beneath the melody lay a deeper message: liberation. When Sharpe preached, his words lit sparks in the darkness. God created us all equal, he reminded them. Slavery is against his will. The enslaved listened, hearts pounding, daring to imagine a future beyond chains. By late 1831, Sharpe had turned faith into strategy. His plan was bold but peaceful: a general strike. During Christmas, when the planters gathered for feasts and merriment, the enslaved would simply refuse to work. No cutting cane, no tending fields, no obeying orders. They would stand together and demand freedom. But even as Sharpe planned a strike, others prepared for war. Among the enslaved, memories of Africa and whispers of rebellion burned strong. Machetes, the very tools of their bondage, could become weapons. Rumors spread of men sharpening blades, hiding gunpowder, gathering courage. The air grew heavy with tension. Planters sensed unease but dismissed it as superstition. They believed their slaves too broken to rise, too afraid to fight. They could not see the storm forming around them. Then came Christmas. On December 27, 1831, the strike began. At first, it was silent defiance. In plantations across the island, enslaved men and women put down their tools. Overseers shouted, threatened, raised their whips, but the slaves stood firm. They demanded not wages, not kindness, but liberty. But silence quickly turned to fire. In the hills of St. James Parish, cane fields erupted in flames. Great houses, symbols of planter wealth, were torched. Cane barns burned so fiercely that the night sky glowed red for miles. Within days, rebellion swept across the island. What began as a strike grew into the largest slave uprising the British West Indies had ever seen. Over 60,000 enslaved people rose up. They carried machetes, axes, and clubs. They shouted hymns turned into war cries. They struck overseers, drove planters from their homes, and set fire to the wealth that had been built on their suffering. Drums echoed across the hills, signaling resistance. British troops scrambled to respond, but the island was ablaze. For days, rebellion ruled. Soldiers marched, muskets fired, but enslaved fighters fought fiercely, retreating into mountains and forests, striking from the shadows. It was chaos. The empire's most profitable colony teetered on the edge of collapse. Samuel Sharpe, the preacher, had not envisioned this firestorm. He had hoped for a peaceful strike, for negotiation. But once the flames began, there was no stopping them. The enslaved had tasted resistance, and they would not return quietly to chains. The planters begged for reinforcements. The British responded with overwhelming force. Warships sailed into Jamaican harbors. Soldiers marched through the cane fields, muskets gleaming. The rebellion was met with brutal retaliation. Battles raged. Enslaved men and women, armed only with blades and courage, faced cannons and rifles. The odds were impossible, but they fought with a desperation born of centuries of suffering. For weeks, the island was drenched in fire and blood. By January of 1832, the rebellion was crushed. British troops executed rebels by the hundreds, their bodies left hanging from trees as warnings. Over 500 were killed in battle. As many as 1,000 more were executed afterward, hanged, shot, or burned alive. Entire communities were torn apart in retribution. The Christmas Rebellion ended in tragedy, and Samuel Sharpe was captured. He was tried in a colonial court, accused of inciting insurrection. Planters saw him not as a preacher, but as a traitor, the man who had planted the seeds of revolt. He was sentenced to death. On May 23, 1832, Samuel Sharpe was hanged in the town square of Montego Bay. Crowds gathered to watch as the preacher who dared to defy an empire was led to the gallows. His last words carried across the crowd. "I would rather die upon yonder gallows than live in slavery." He died a martyr, but his voice did not die with him. News of the uprising reached Britain, carried across the ocean by planters desperate for sympathy and abolitionists hungry for justice. In Parliament, debates raged. The Christmas Rebellion revealed what many already feared. Slavery was not just immoral, it was unsustainable. An empire could not stand forever on chains. The brutality of the suppression horrified the British public. The courage of the enslaved inspired abolitionists. And Samuel Sharpe's words became a rallying cry. 2 years later, in 1833, Britain abolished slavery throughout its empire. The law did not come from kindness, but from necessity, from the undeniable truth that the enslaved would never stop fighting for freedom. The Christmas Rebellion had shown that even the mightiest empire could be shaken by those it tried to silence. In Jamaica, Samuel Sharpe became a national hero. His name lived on in songs, in sermons, in the whispered stories of freedom passed down through generations. He was the preacher who turned faith into fire, who transformed a Christmas hymn into a cry for liberty. The Great Slave Uprising of 1831 did not free Jamaica overnight. Thousands died. Entire communities suffered, but it changed history. It forced the empire to confront its sins. It showed the world that the enslaved were not passive victims, but active fighters for their own liberation. This was Samuel Sharpe's story, the preacher who turned a Christmas hymn into a cry for liberty. His uprising did not free Jamaica overnight, but it broke the empire's chains forever. And yet, so many stories remain untold. If you want to hear more hidden slave stories that history tried to silence, watch this playlist here and subscribe for more haunting history. Some chains are broken by law, others are broken by fire.